If I see one more top open world list that puts GTA 5, The Witcher 3, or Skyrim in the top 3 spots, I am going to lose my mind. We get it. They're good. They sold 50 million copies. You've played them, your grandma has played them, even your dog has probably done a playthrough of Skyrim by now. But what about the games that didn't have the marketing budget of a small country? What about the ones that launched on the same day as a masterpiece and got buried? Or the ones that were just a little too weird for the mainstream critics to understand? I'm talking about the games that actually have a soul. The ones that might be a little janky or a little rough around the edges, but offer an experience you literally cannot get anywhere else. We are ignoring the checklist simulators today. Put down the Assassin's Creed. Here are some of the best underrated open world games that you actually need to play before you die. Let's get into it. Rise of the Ronin. Team Ninja is famous for making really hard games like Nioh and Ninja Gaiden, but Rise of the Ronin is their first time trying a massive open world, and it actually rules. It came out right at the same time as some other huge games, so a lot of people just skipped it or thought the graphics looked a bit old. But they are totally missing out on some of the best combat you can find in any open world game right now. You play as a nameless samurai called a Veiled Edge during a time in Japan when everything was changing because Western countries were starting to show up with guns and new technology. The best thing about this game is how the fighting feels, because it is fast and snappy and makes you feel like a total boss once you learn the timing. You have to parry attacks, which the game calls counter-sparking, and it is so satisfying to hear that clashing metal sound and then finish off an enemy with a cool animation. You get to use katanas and spears and even giant clubs, but you also get to use old school pistols and rifles, which keeps the gameplay feeling fresh. There are different fighting stances you can switch between on the fly, and it feels like a dance where you are constantly trying to find the best way to break your enemy's guard. Walking or riding your horse through 19th century Japan is really cool because the world is split into big areas like Yokohama and Kyoto, and they feel very alive. You have a mechanical glider that looks like bird wings, and you can jump off a roof and soar over the streets and then use a grappling hook to zip back up to another building. There are tons of side activities to do, like collecting stray cats or taking pictures of famous landmarks. And even though it sounds simple, it actually makes you want to explore every corner of the map. The story is also pretty interesting because you meet real historical figures and you have to choose which side to join. Your choices actually matter and change who stays your friend and who becomes your enemy. It might not be the most beautiful game ever made if you compare it to something like Ghost of Tsushima, but the gameplay loop is way more addictive and the world is packed with things to find. If you want an open world where the combat never gets boring and you get to be a cool samurai who uses a glider and a grappling hook, then you definitely need to give this one a shot.
As your blades carve a new future.
Rage 2 drops you into this chaotic, post-apocalyptic world that's as messed up as it is colorful. It's the sequel to the first Rage, but instead of being a slow, kind of serious shooter, this one goes full speed, full-on crazy, and doesn't care about subtlety. The story is simple. You're Walker, the last ranger left after the world went to hell, and you're trying to take down these insane gangs and a big evil corporation that's trying to control everything. It's not some deep, emotional narrative, but that's fine because the game isn't trying to be a story-heavy experience. What it's doing is letting you run, shoot, and explode everything in your path. The open world is huge and kind of beautiful in a destroyed, scorched earth kind of way. You've got deserts, ruined cities, forests that survive the apocalypse, and these little settlements where random gangs or survivors are doing their own thing. The world feels alive in that chaotic, unpredictable way, and there's always some side quest or random encounter to pull you in. What makes Rage 2 stand out is the combat. It mixes traditional gunplay with over-the-top abilities called nanotrites. You can dash through enemies, slam the ground to launch them into the air, or fire super-powered attacks that look and feel amazing. Every encounter feels fast, explosive, and just fun to control. It's like the game rewards you for being aggressive, for moving around, and for not holding back at all. Vehicles also play a big role. You're constantly driving around in crazy cars and trucks that handle really well, which makes traveling between missions fun and dangerous at the same time. You can race across deserts while shooting out of your car, hit jumps or ram enemies in their vehicles, which just adds another layer to the chaos. The gun and upgrade system is satisfying too. You can mix and match weapons, modify them, and pair them with your nanotrite powers to create combos that feel insanely powerful. The art style is unique too. Unlike most post-apocalyptic games that go for gray gray and depressing, Rage 2 is bright, colorful, and ridiculous in a way that makes it feel different. The characters are over the top, the enemies are weird and varied, and the world itself has little details that make it feel lived in despite being destroyed. It's not perfect, sometimes the missions feel repetitive and the story is shallow, but the freedom to run, shoot, and blow things up however you want makes it stand out from most open world shooters. Rage 2 isn't trying to be a masterpiece, it's trying to be pure, chaotic fun, and it nails that. If you give it a chance, it feels like one of the most satisfying, non-stop action open world games out there, and honestly, it's one of those games that deserved way more attention when it came out. At Max, when people talk about great open world games based on movies, they usually forget about, and that is a huge mistake. This game captures the dusty and brutal feeling of the movies perfectly, and it is one of the most underrated games from the last 10 years. You play as Max, and your goal is simple, because you just want to build the ultimate car called the Magnum Opus so you can survive the wasteland. It starts off with Max losing everything and being left for dead in the desert, so you have to scavenge for scrap metal and parts, turn a rusty bucket of bolts into a literal tank on wheels. The car combat is the real star of the show here, and it feels better than almost any other game that involves driving. You aren't just racing around because you are actively trying to tear other cars apart using a harpoon gun and side-mounted flamethrowers and heavy armor. There is nothing more satisfying than using your grappling hook to rip the wheel off an enemy vehicle or pulling a sniper out of his tower while you are speeding past at 80 miles per hour. As you upgrade your car, it becomes faster and deadlier, and you really start to feel like the king of the road in a world where everyone wants to kill you. When you aren't in your car, you are exploring enemy camps and fighting bandits on foot using a combat system that feels a lot like the Batman Arkham game. It is heavy, crunchy, and Max hits like a truck, using shivs and shotguns and his bare fists to take down groups of warboys. The world itself is surprisingly beautiful, even though it is just a giant desert, because the lighting and the sandstorms are incredible to look at. When a massive storm rolls in with lightning and flying debris, you actually feel the danger and have to find cover or risk getting blown away. The loop of clearing out territories and helping different stronghold leaders is really addictive because every upgrade you get makes a noticeable difference. You might be hunting for water and food to stay alive, or looking for special car bodies to change how your vehicle looks, but everything you do feels like it matters for your survival. It is a lonely and atmospheric game that doesn't hold your hand too much, and it deserves way more credit for how it handles exploration and vehicle customization. If you missed this one when it first came out, you should definitely go back and play it, because there still isn't another game quite like it. Lost Judgment. If you love the Yakuza series but want something with a bit more mystery and even crazier action, then Lost Judgment is a game you have to play. A lot of people pass it up because they think they need to play 100 other games first to understand the story, but this game stands on its own as an incredible detective thriller. You play as Takayuki Yagami, who is a private investigator with some seriously cool martial arts skills. The game takes place in the bright neon streets of Kamurocho and a massive new area in Yokohama, and it feels like a place you could actually get lost in because there's so much detail everywhere you look. The combat is some of the best that RGG Studio has ever made it, and it is super fast and flashy. You have different fighting styles that you can switch between instantly depending on who you are fighting. Crane style is great for taking on big groups of thugs with wide kicks, and Tiger style is perfect for focusing all your power on one tough boss. There's also a Snake style that lets you disarm enemies and use their own momentum against them, which feels amazing when someone tries to pull a gun on you. Every fight feels like a scene from a high-budget action movie, and the animations are so smooth that you never get tired of beating up bad guys. What makes this game special is the school setting, because a big part of the story involves Yagami going undercover at a high school to solve a bullying case that turns into something much darker. This opens up a ton of mini-games called school stories, where you can join the dance club or the robotics club or even a biker gang. It sounds silly, but these stories are actually really deep and give you a break from the main serious mystery. You get to build relationships with the students and help them out while also doing detective work, like using a drone to spy on suspects, or using a robotic dog to sniff out clues. The main story is really heavy and deals with some serious themes about justice and the law, but it is written so well that you will stay glued to your screen to see what happens next. When you aren't chasing down leads, you can spend hours just playing arcade games, or going to the batting cages, or just eating at all the different restaurants. It is one of those open worlds that feels small enough to learn every street, but big enough to always have a surprise waiting around the corner. If you want a game that has a perfect mix of a serious detective story and totally wild side content, then Lost Judgment is a masterpiece that deserves way more love. Watch Dogs came out and kind of shook up the open world scene in its own way, even if people don't talk about it much anymore. You play as Aiden Pierce, a hacker with a tragic past who's out for revenge after a family tragedy, and the game throws you into Chicago, a city that feels real, alive, and like it has its own heartbeat. What made it unique back then, and still does, is the way it mixes hacking into an open world game. You're not just running and shooting or driving around. You can actually hack almost anything connected to the city's central operating system. Streetlights, traffic lights, bridges, cameras, phones, and even cars can all be controlled to give you an edge or just to cause chaos. The world itself is surprisingly detailed. Chicago is packed with NPCs that feel like real people going about their day, and the game has this sense of constant movement and danger. You can tail someone through the city, hack their phone to get info, or set traps using the environment. It's clever because it gives you so many different ways to approach missions. You can be sneaky, or you can just go in guns blazing with your hacking tools, making everything explode or fall apart around you. The driving is solid too. Cars feel weighty, crashes are satisfying, and driving through the streets while escaping cops or taking down targets is tense and fun. The story itself is a mix of personal revenge and bigger conspiracy stuff. It's not super deep or emotional like some modern story-driven games, but it keeps you invested in Aiden and the people around him. Side missions and online features also add a lot to the game. You can invade other players' games, hack them, or be hacked yourself, which adds a unique tension that most open-world games don't have. It's a little weird at first, but it's actually a really cool idea that makes the world feel alive and unpredictable. Combat is interesting because the game pushes you to think differently. You can fight with guns, but your hacking gives you tools that are often more powerful. You can turn the environment into a weapon, set up distractions, or mess with enemies' cars and phones to take them down without even firing a shot. That kind of gameplay was pretty fresh back when it came out, and even now it feels unique in a world of generic open world games. Watch Dogs is one of those underrated open world games that feels different from anything else. It's not perfect, the story can be a bit messy, and some missions get repetitive, but it's creative, the world is alive, and the hacking mechanics make you feel clever every time you play. If you skipped it back then, it's worth going back to because it still has that mix of fun, strategy, and chaos that most open world games don't bother trying anymore. Scarface, the world is yours. Most people call this a Grand Theft Auto clone, but it actually does a lot of things better than GTA did back then, especially when it comes to the empire building and the combat. You start with nothing but a tiny little car and a pistol, and you have to slowly take back every neighborhood in Miami by making deals and taking out rival gangs. The gameplay loop is really addictive because you aren't just doing random missions for people you don't care about. Everything you do is about making Tony rich and powerful again, so you spend a lot of time dealing drugs to small-time pushers and then using that money to buy big businesses like jewelry stores and hotels. You have to actually negotiate the price of the drugs using a little meter, and if you mess up the deal, the other guy might try to kill you, which makes every transaction feel intense. Once you get enough money, you can buy exotics like fancy cars and huge boats, or even hire henchmen like an assassin or a driver to help you out during missions.
Start making my own moves. Gotta get back in, you know?
One of the most unique things about this game is the balls meter, which you fill up by doing crazy stuff during combat, like taunting your enemies after you shoot them, or getting headshots. When the meter's full, you can go into a blind rage mode where the screen turns red and you become invincible for a short time with infinite ammo. It makes you feel exactly like Tony Montana from the movie because you are just screaming insults and blasting everyone in sight. The game also has a weirdly honorable side because Tony refuses to hurt innocent people, so if you try to aim at a civilian, he'll just lower his gun and say something about how he doesn't need that kind of trouble. The voice acting is also top tier, even though Al Pacino didn't do the voice himself because the guy they got sounds exactly like him and captures all that famous energy. You can walk up to almost anyone on the street and insult them or talk to them, and the dialogue is always hilarious and full of personality. The soundtrack is also packed with 80s hits and original music that makes driving around the neon streets of Miami feel like you stepped right into the movie. It is a huge shame that this game is so hard to find on modern consoles because it is easily one of the best open world crime games ever made, and it still holds up today if you can find a way to play it. Cry Primal. Most people think of Far Cry and immediately imagine crazy explosions and guys with machine guns, but Far Cry Primal took a massive risk by getting rid of all technology and going back to the Stone Age. It came out right after Far Cry 4, so a lot of fans thought it was just going to be a simple skin on top of the old game, but it actually feels completely different once you start playing. You play as Takar, who is a hunter trying to survive in the land of Oros, which is a beautiful and dangerous world filled with woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers. Since there are no guns, you have to rely on bows and spears and clubs, which makes the combat feel way more personal and scary. You can't just stand on a hill and snipe everyone from a mile away with a silencer because you have to get close and use stealth to survive. The best part of the whole game is the Beastmaster system, where you can actually tame the beasts you find in the wild. You can have a pet wolf that helps you track enemies, or a giant bear that acts like a tank and smashes through enemy camps for you. You can even ride a saber-toothed tiger into battle, which is one of the coolest things you can do in any open world game ever. The world of Oros is one of the most immersive maps Ubisoft has ever created because it feels truly ancient and wild. Since you're at the bottom of the food chain starting out, you really feel the danger when the sun goes down and the more aggressive animals come out to hunt you. You have to carry a torch to keep the predators away and find wood to build fires so you don't freeze to death or get eaten in the dark. The game even uses a totally made-up language based on what scientists think people actually sounded like thousands of years ago, which makes the whole experience feel even more real. Even though it doesn't have the vehicles or the big guns of the other Far Cry games, the sense of progression is super satisfying because you are building up your village and helping your tribe grow. As you rescue people and bring them back home, you unlock new skills and better weapons like double-shot bows and firebombs. It is a very relaxing but also intense game that focuses on the relationship between humans and nature, and it stands out as one of the most unique entries in the entire series. If you are tired of the same old shooters and want an open world that feels like a prehistoric survival movie, then you definitely need to give Primal a chance. Dogs is probably the most underrated open world game of all time, and it is a crime that we never got a sequel. It came out around the same time as some other massive crime games, and people just assumed it was another generic city sandbox, but they were totally wrong. You play as Wei Shen, who is an undercover cop from San Francisco who goes back to Hong Kong to infiltrate the triads. The story is super intense because Wei starts to get too close to the people he is supposed to be arresting, and you really feel the pressure of him trying to keep his two lives separate. The best thing about this game is that it is not just about shooting guns, because the focus is almost entirely on hand-to-hand combat. Since it takes place in Hong Kong, you are using kung fu to take down groups of enemies, and it feels way more satisfying than just pulling a trigger. You can use the environment to finish people off, like throwing someone into a dumpster or slamming a car door on them, or even using a giant fan in a kitchen. As you play, you unlock new martial arts moves and combos that make you feel like you are starring in a classic Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan movie. The hits feel heavy and the animations are brutal, and it never gets old, even after hours of playing. Hong Kong itself is one of the coolest cities ever put into a video game because it feels so dense and alive. The streets are narrow and filled with neon signs and food stalls where you can actually buy pork buns to heal your character. Rain looks incredible on the pavement, and driving through the city at night while listening to the radio is a total vibe. Speaking of driving, the car mechanics are really fun and arcadey, and you can even do a leap from your car onto another vehicle while you are speeding down the highway. It makes the chase scenes feel like something out of a high-speed action flick. There is so much to do outside of the main story, like entering illegal street races, or going to karaoke bars, or even betting on cockfights. You also have a wardrobe full of cool outfits that give you different bonuses, like better damage or more respect from the police. The voice acting is also amazing, with some really famous actors involved, and it makes the characters feel like real people that you actually care about. If you want an open world that has a better story than most movies, and combat that actually makes you feel like a martial arts master, then you have to play Sleeping Dogs. The Saboteur. You really have to understand the tragedy behind this game because it was the very last thing Pandemic Studios ever made. These were the guys who gave us the original Star Wars Battlefront and Mercenaries, so they knew exactly how to make things blow up in a way that felt good. Electronic Arts basically told them the studio was closing down while they were still finishing the game, and you can kind of feel that unfinished energy in some parts of the world. It came out in 2009, and it was trying to do something that even GTA and Assassin's Creed weren't doing at the time, which was mixing stealth and driving and climbing in a historical setting that actually felt miserable. The coolest mechanic in the game is the will to fight system, and it is not just a visual trick. When you're in a district that is heavily occupied by the Nazi forces, the entire screen is literally black and white like an old 1940s film, but the only things that have color are the red armbands and flags of the soldiers. It makes the world feel cold and scary, and it actually changes how you play, because the civilians in those areas are too afraid to help you, and the guards are everywhere. Once you start blowing up their fuel tanks and killing their generals, the color literally bleeds back into the neighborhood, and suddenly the French people will start fighting back in the streets to help you escape.
First, we'll knock up a friend of mine. He can help us with Dr. Kessler.
And your friend?
The main character, Sean Devlin, is also a big departure from your typical hero because he is just a drunk Irish race car driver who wants to kill a specific Nazi officer who murdered his best friend. He is not a super soldier, so if you get into a big shootout, you are probably going to die pretty fast. You have to spend a lot of time on the rooftops, and the climbing feels a bit heavy and clunky compared to modern games, but it works because Sean is just a regular guy pulling himself up ledges. You can also steal a bunch of different 1940s cars, and since Sean is a racer, they actually go pretty fast and have a decent weight to them when you are drifting around the tight corners of Paris. One of the most unique things is the suspicion meter, which is much better than the stars in GTA. If you are dressed like a civilian, you can walk right past guards as long as you don't do anything weird like running or jumping over fences. But the game lets you kill a soldier and take his uniform, which is a huge deal because it lets you sneak into restricted areas. If you get too close to a guard though, he will start to notice your accent or that your uniform doesn't fit right, and his little yellow bar will fill up. It creates this really tense feeling where you are trying to act natural while standing next to a tank you just rigged with dynamite. It is a very special game that deserved a sequel, and it's a shame we never got to see this version of Paris again.
There's our man now.
Days Gone is one of those open world games that a lot of people slept on, even though it's actually massive and really well done. You play as Deacon St. John, a drifter and biker trying to survive in a world overrun by freakers, which are basically fast, zombie-like creatures. The game takes place in the Pacific Northwest, and the world feels huge, wild, and kind of alive. Forests, mountains, small towns, rivers, and highways are all connected in this open world, and traveling by motorcycle is one of the best parts because it makes you feel like you're really part of this world. Your bike isn't just for getting around, it's also your lifeline. You have to fuel it, maintain it, and upgrade it, which makes every ride a bit more tense and personal. What makes Days Gone stand out is the way it mixes survival, action, and story. You're not just running around killing enemies, you're dealing with a world that reacts to you. Freakers roam in huge hordes that feel insane, and getting caught in one without planning is basically suicide. But that's also what makes it fun. You can set traps, sneak around, or just ride through a horde guns blazing if you're feeling reckless. The game balances stealth, combat, and exploration really well, and it gives you a sense of freedom in how you handle situations. Side missions, camps, and random encounters make the world feel like it's actually lived in, not just a backdrop for the main story.
We don't have hope.
The story itself is surprisingly emotional for a survival action game. Deacon has this tragic past, and the game slowly reveals his relationships, losses, and struggles as he tries to survive and protect the people he cares about. It's the kind of story that doesn't feel forced. It's messy, human, and sometimes brutal, which fits perfectly with the world you're living in. The mechanics are also solid. Shooting and melee combat feel good, crafting is useful without being tedious, and your bike controls smoothly whether you're cruising on the highway or dodging freakers through the forest. The game also has a day-night cycle and dynamic weather that affect gameplay, making the world feel even more alive and unpredictable. At night, freakers are even more dangerous, which makes traveling feel tense and exciting. No, yeah, it isn't literally a 10 out of 10 masterpiece or something. Some missions feel repetitive and the pacing can drag at times, but the combination of story, open world freedom, and survival action mechanics makes it stand out. It's one of those games where if you give yourself time to just explore, fight, and ride around, you start to appreciate all the little details and the care put into the world. For anyone who loves open world games with a mix of danger, freedom, and a surprisingly emotional story, Days Gone is definitely worth checking out, and it doesn't get nearly enough credit for how big and immersive it actually is.
What does it matter if everyone else is dead?
Mafia 2. The Mafia series is in such a weird spot because it has some of the most beautiful and atmospheric open worlds ever made, but a lot of people get mad at them because they aren't like Grand Theft Auto. If you go into these games expecting a sandbox where you can fly planes and go on random rampages, you're gonna be disappointed. But if you look at them as these massive, playable movies where the city is a stage, they are honestly some of the best experiences you can have. Mafia 2 is the peak of this series for most fans, and it has a really interesting history. It took forever to make, almost 8 years, and it was developed by a team in the Czech Republic who wanted to capture the American dream in the 1940s and 50s. You play as Vito Scaletta, a war veteran who comes home to Empire Bay and finds out his family is in huge debt. He doesn't want to work a crappy job for no money, so he and his best friend Joe start working for the mob. The world changes with you as the years go by, which is something almost no other game does. You start in the winter of 1945 with snow on the ground and old-fashioned music, and then halfway through, the world shifts to the 1950s with bright colors, rock and roll, and faster cars. The gameplay mechanics in Mafia 2 are way more grounded and heavy than other open world games. The cars handle like real pieces of metal from that era, meaning they are slow to start and hard to stop, especially when the roads are icy. You actually have to worry about the police for things like speeding or crashing into other cars. If you drive too fast, the cops will pull you over and try to give you a ticket, and you can actually choose to pay it or try to run away. It makes you feel like you're part of a real world with rules, not just a playground where you can do whatever you want. Even the shooting feels punchy and dangerous. You can't just stand out in the open because a few bullets will actually take you down. What really makes this series underrated is how it handles detail. In Mafia 2, you can open the fridge in your apartment to drink a beer or eat a sandwich to heal, and you can even stop at a gas station to fuel up your car if the tank gets low. These things don't really add to the action, but they make you feel like you're living a life. Mafia 1 Definitive Edition did a great job of bringing that back, and Mafia 3, even though it was a bit repetitive, had one of the best depictions of the American South in the 60s ever put in a game. The series cares more about the vibe and the story than giving you a million map icons to click on, and that's why it still stands out today.
Working man's a sucker, that's for damn sure.
Red Faction Guerrilla is a game that came out in 2009, and even though it is over 15 years old, it still does things with physics that modern games like Starfield or Grand Theft Auto can't even touch. It was made by Volition, the same studio that did Saints Row, but while Saints Row was all about being wacky, Red Faction was about one very specific thing: destroying every single building you see. Most games tell you that you can break stuff, but usually it's just a preset animation where a wall disappears. In this game, every building has an actual skeletal structure, so if you take out the support beams on the first floor, the entire roof will eventually cave in because of the weight. The story puts you on Mars, and you play as a guy named Alec Mason who is just a regular miner. He arrives on the planet to work with his brother, but the government there, the EDF, is basically a bunch of space fascists who kill his brother almost immediately. Mason joins a group of rebels called the Red Faction to fight back. The world of Mars is mostly just red dirt and rocks, which sounds boring, but the developers did that on purpose so that the buildings would stand out. Every bridge, tower, and gas station you see is a target. You aren't just shooting guys, you are systematically tearing down their infrastructure to lower their control over different zones. The gameplay is built around your sledgehammer and explosives. You can walk up to a massive chimney and start swinging, and you'll see the concrete actually chip away exactly where you hit it. If you're smart, you won't just run in the front door of a base, you'll use a remote explosive to blow a hole in the back wall, or better yet, you'll drive a huge truck through the side of the building to crush the enemies inside. Later on, you get a weapon called the nano rifle, which literally dissolves matter, letting you erase chunks of a wall to create your own sniper holes. It's a very tactical kind of destruction that makes you look at the environment differently than any other open world game. What really makes it underrated is that no one has really tried to copy it since it came out. It's hard to program a world where anything can fall down at any time, so most developers just don't bother. When you play this game, you get a sense of freedom that is actually kind of rare. You can spend an hour just trying to figure out how to tip a massive radio tower onto an enemy barracks just to see if the physics will allow it. It feels like a giant science experiment where you happen to have a rocket launcher. If you like games that let you solve problems by breaking things into a million pieces, this is basically the gold standard. Sunset Overdrive is a really weird case because it was actually made by Insomniac Games, the same people who do the Spider-Man games and Ratchet & Clank, but it was an Xbox exclusive at a time when nobody was buying an Xbox. Because of that, a lot of people just never touched it, which is a shame because it is probably the most colorful and high-energy game they have ever made. It came out in 2014 and it felt like a direct response to all the gritty brown and gray shooters that were popular back then. It doesn't take itself seriously at all, and the whole premise is that an energy drink called Overcharged Delirium XT turned everyone in Sunset City into disgusting mutants called the pretty OD. The game is unique because it treats the entire city like a giant skate park. In most open world games, you spend your time running on the street or driving a car, but in Sunset Overdrive, if you touch the ground, you are basically dead. You have to stay moving by grinding on power lines, wall running on skyscrapers, and bouncing off the tops of cars or trees. The movement feels very fluid once you get the hang of it, and it has this momentum system where the more stunts and kills you do, the more your style meter goes up. When that meter is full, your weapons get extra effects and the music gets way louder and more intense. It basically forces you to play like a crazy person to be effective. Speaking of weapons, this is where the Ratchet & Clank DNA really shows. You aren't just using regular pistols or rifles. You have a gun that shoots exploding teddy bears, a weapon that launches vinyl records that bounce off walls and slice through enemies, and even a gun called the High Fidelity that fires actual fireworks. Every fight is a giant explosion of neon colors and sound effects. You have to constantly switch between these weapons while you are grinding and flipping through the air, so your brain is always working at 100 miles per hour. It's a lot to handle at first, but once it clicks, it feels better than almost any other movement system in a game. The history of the game is also a bit of a bummer because Insomniac owns the rights to it, but now that they are a Sony-owned studio, we will probably never get a sequel on Xbox, and a PlayStation version seems unlikely too. It's just stuck in this middle ground. It has this very specific punk rock aesthetic from the early 2010s that might feel a bit dated to some people now, but the actual gameplay loop of never stopping your movement is still top tier. If you want a game that feels like a cartoon on steroids and actually rewards you for being stylish instead of just hiding behind cover, this is the one you missed out on. Batman Arkham Origins is honestly kinda sad how many people skip Batman Arkham Origins just because it wasn't made by Rocksteady. When it came out in 2013, everyone was comparing it to Arkham City and complained that the map was too similar or that it felt like a filler game, but if you actually sit down and play it now, you realize it has some of the best moments in the entire series. This was developed by WB Games Montreal, and they were tasked with telling a prequel story about a younger, angrier Batman who is still learning how to be a hero. He isn't the calm, calculated guy we see in the other games, he's a brawler who makes mistakes and lets his temper get the better of him, which makes the character feel much more human. The story is probably the strongest part of the game, and it has a great hook. It's Christmas Eve in Gotham, and a crime lord named Black Mask has put a $50 million bounty on Batman's head. This brings 8 of the world's deadliest assassins, like Deathstroke and Bane, into the city to hunt him down all in one night. The atmosphere is incredible, because the city is covered in snow and Christmas lights, but it feels completely abandoned and dangerous. The relationship between Batman and Alfred is also way more tense here, because Alfred is terrified that Bruce is going to get himself killed, and they actually have some really emotional arguments that you don't see in the other games.
What? You're not some hardened vigilante. You're a young man with a trust fund and too much anger. You're in over your head, and I don't want this to be your end.
When it comes to the gameplay, it takes the free-flow combat everyone loves and makes it feel a bit more brutal. The gadgets are mostly the same, but you get these shock gloves later in the game that let you punch through shields and armored enemies, which makes you feel like an absolute powerhouse. But where Origins really beats the other games is the boss fights. The fight against Deathstroke is legendary because it's not just about mashing buttons, it's a high-speed duel where you have to counter his attacks perfectly or he will take you apart. Even the fight against Bane feels like a terrifying game of cat and mouse in the dark. These weren't just hit the big guy 3 times to win fights, they actually felt like puzzles you had to solve with your skills. Another detail people forget is how this game handled the detective work. It introduced a system where you could reconstruct crime scenes in 3D, scrubbing through the footage to find hidden clues and see exactly how a bullet traveled or where a body fell. It really leaned into the world's greatest detective side of Batman that usually gets ignored for the action. Even though the map of North Gotham is technically a reused and slightly altered version of Arkham City, the new area, across the bridge, and the interior levels, like the GCPD building, are really well designed. It's a game that was overshadowed by its older brothers, but it has a soul of its own, and some of the best voice acting and writing in the whole franchise. Ubisoft is usually known for making massive games like Assassin's Creed that can sometimes feel a bit too serious or even a little exhausting to finish, but Immortals Fenyx Rising is different. It is a super colorful and lighthearted take on Greek mythology that takes a lot of inspiration from Breath of the Wild while adding its own unique spin on things. When it first came out, a lot of people just called it a Zelda clone and ignored it because the characters looked a bit like they were from a mobile game, but that was a huge mistake because this is actually one of the most fun and polished open worlds Ubisoft has ever built. You play as a hero named Fenyx, who has to save the Greek god gods from a giant monster named Typhon, who has basically taken over their home and turned everyone to stone. What makes the game really stand out is the narration, because the whole story is being told by Zeus and Prometheus while you're actually playing. They are constantly bickering and making jokes about the things you are doing, or arguing about how the real Greek myths actually happened. It is genuinely funny and makes the world feel much less lonely than other open world games, because you always have these two powerful gods talking in your ear. The writing is surprisingly smart, and it pokes fun at the source material in a way that shows the developers really knew their stuff. Even if you don't know much about Greek gods, you will still get a kick out of how much Zeus acts like a grumpy dad who doesn't want to admit he messed up.
Camouflage. Prometheus, please. Stop. It's so good.
The combat is much faster and more arcade-like than something like Assassin's Creed, because you have access to literal godly powers from the very start. You can summon giant spears from the ground to launch enemies into the air, or use a massive hammer to smash them into the dirt. You also get the wings of Daedalus, which let you double jump and glide all over the map, and it feels incredibly smooth transition from fighting on the ground to soaring over a canyon. There are no weapons that break here, so you can just focus on getting stronger and unlocking new abilities that make you feel like a total powerhouse. Every region of the map is themed after a different god, like Aphrodite or Ares, and they all have their own look and feel, with tons of puzzles hidden everywhere. The puzzles are a huge part of the game, and they're actually really clever without being too frustrating to solve. You might have to guide an arrow through a series of hoops, or move giant blocks onto pressure plates to open a hidden door. There are also these things called Vaults of Tartarus, which are like mini dungeons that test your platforming and combat skills, and they are some of the best parts of the game. The world is just the right size, because it isn't too big that you get bored driving across it, but it is packed with enough secrets that you always feel rewarded for exploring a random mountain or cave. If you want a game that is bright and funny and actually respects your time while giving you a great adventure, then you should definitely check this one out.